So good morning. Welcome to this Association for Art History's event on Careers in Art History. I'm Christina Bradstreet. I'm the head of programs at the AAH. And the Association for Art History is the subject specialist organisation for art history in the UK. So we promote the value of art history and visual culture for all, and we help to ensure that art history is supported and understood and continues to thrive. And we do this through publishing our journal, Art History, awarding grants and prizes, creating resources to support those studying, teaching, or working with art history. And we advocate for the discipline. So we keep a watchful eye over issues and legislation and trends that affect our subject. And of course, we hold events. So we hold an annual 3-day conference, which is the major annual event for art historians, which takes place in April each year. And we hold a nationwide art history festival, which is taking place in September, with events taking place up and down the country, which is really about promoting art history to the general public. And then we also hold professional development events for art historians, and careers events for those thinking about careers, having studied art history. So this morning's event is part of a series of career events that we hold annually, aimed at A-level students and undergraduates, as well as career changers. So this morning we've got an hour and a half in which we'll hear from 5 speakers working in careers in museums and galleries, and who work in jobs that represent some of the many jobs that are possible for an art history graduate. So these are, of course, just some of the many roles available to those who've studied art history, and we will cover more roles in future events. So I'm very grateful to our 5 speakers today, who will each be speaking for 10 minutes about their role and their career route, and offer tips and insights about how to get into such roles and the kind of qualities and skills that are needed. They are, of course, giving up their time this morning to help you and support you in your career development. So please do make this time count. You're also giving up your morning, so make it worth it. Ask any questions that you have. So please write them in the chat, and we've scheduled about half an hour for questions at the end, which will take us up to 12:30. So if you can write your questions in the chat as we go along, then that's really helpful to me to prepare the Q&A. So I will introduce our first speaker today. So our first speaker is Edith Brown. And Edith is assistant curator at the Barber Institute at the University of Birmingham. So welcome, Edith.
Hi, thanks very much for having me. I'll just start my video. Can you hear me and see me okay?
We can hear you and see you. Do you want me to stay with you while you share your slides, or are you?
Oh, I don't have a slideshow.
Oh, you don't? I forgot. Sorry. Over to you.
Okay, terrific. Okay, thanks, Christina. Thanks very much for having me. As already mentioned, my name is Edith Brown, and I'm the assistant curator at the Barber Institute of Fine Arts. So this is the art gallery at the University of Birmingham. We have a terrific collection of Western European art dating roughly from the medieval period up to the 20th century. This is largely paintings, but we also have a great collection of sculpture, decorative arts, and works on paper, which is sort of my area of specialism. So just to give a bit of structure today, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about my current role, and then the path I took to get to my current role, and a little bit about why I like my job, why I think it matters, and then finally I'll talk about who it might suit. So first of all, in my current role, I would say broadly, as an assistant curator, my responsibilities fall into 2 camps. One is caring for the collection, and the other is researching and interpreting the collection. Now, caring for the collection is actually a big team endeavor. We're a small museum, so I work closely with our registrar. You'll hear from another registrar later today, and our museum technician. In a larger museum, you'd probably also be working with other curators and in-house conservators or art handlers. But caring for the collection on a daily basis for me involves daily gallery checks, such as doing visual checks of the gallery, also checking on light levels, relative humidity and temperature. Because again, these are things that you don't really think about at all, but when you're caring for historic objects, these can all have gradual effects on the condition of the works. And part of our job is guardianship, stewardship of these works and protecting them. So I might also be, because we're a very small museum, I might do a little bit of art handling, taking works off the wall with the technician and examining them with the conservator to decide whether they can go out for on loan for display at another museum. I might also be in the study room facilitating visitors from other institutions or just interested members of the public looking at works on paper. And a big part of collection care actually is also the documentation. Again, because we're quite a small museum, I do a lot of working with the database. So making sure that all the information we have on the objects is accurate and up to date. In larger museums, that might fall more to registrars. Every museum does things a little bit differently. And a big part of that is also looking after the object files. And again, making sure that all of our information is accurate, again, as guardianship of these objects. Now, the research and interpretation side of my role is probably was the major draw for getting into curatorship for me. So I might be researching an object to give a talk, or as part of like a social media campaign when I'm working with our comms team, or to answer inquiries from members of the public, or in preparation for an exhibition. A big part of that research is also doing due diligence, so researching the provenance of works, perhaps that we're looking to acquire, or again, works going out on loan. So it's a real variety of desk work and hands-on work day to day, and a lot of working interdepartmentally and across teams and talking to the public. My career path has been a little bit unusual. Traditionally, so I'm from Canada, as you can probably tell. I did my undergraduate degree in history of art, and I also studied modern languages. I specialized in the Renaissance. And then I moved to the UK to do my MA in early Netherlandish painting. So again, artwork of the 15th century from the Low Countries, artists you might know, Jan van Eyck, Roger van der Weyden. When I finished my MA, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. I didn't feel ready for further postgraduate work. And at that stage, I felt like I had to make the decision between, did I want to work in the commercial sphere, or did I want to work in the public sphere, working for museums? So I began the journey of 2 years of internships, trying out lots of different types of work. So I did 2 internships in Sotheby's, in the furniture department and the sculpture department. I also did curatorial internships at the V&A and at Dulwich Picture Gallery. Meanwhile, to supplement that, because unfortunately, some of those internships are unpaid, that's a major part of what we do. I was working for a rare books dealer, because there was also a time where I was thinking about being a rare books dealer. So that was quite, it was a really long journey. And I suppose that's one thing to be aware of when you're getting into the arts. You have to build up lots of different experience before you can apply and finally get sort of a permanent position. But I'm so grateful for that breadth of experience now, because it's important to understand, for example, how the commercial sphere works when you're working in the public sphere. And I've draw on a lot of that experience in my day-to-day now. My first permanent job was actually in exhibitions. And for the past 6 years, I was working in exhibitions departments at Dulwich Picture Gallery and at the Wallace Collection. And this was a really, really formative experience, and was sort of museums boot camp, because I learned everything about collections care, about how museums run in terms of strategies for display, and working with conservators, freelance technicians, design, it really gave me a hugely valuable insight into how museums operate, and also gave me a lot of important tools in terms of time management, project management, things that I use as a curator now. But what I was really, really keen on was research and public speaking. So once I had sort of figured out that that was what I wanted to do, in addition to my job, I did volunteering with paintings for hospitals, learning how to write object labels, and sort of supplementing the experience that I knew I would need in order to apply for a curatorial job. In terms of what I love about my job, it's not only having hands-on experience day to day with objects of huge historical and cultural value, but it's how it challenges my thinking. So all the things that you might be learning when you do your art history degree are challenged on a daily basis when you're working in museums, because you're constantly thinking about how do we make these collections relevant to the public, to the visitors, and especially when you're working for a national collection, to the people to whom this collection ultimately belongs. So that is probably what I enjoy most about my job and why I think it matters. Because again, we're guardians for these historical objects, and it's most important to make the connection to the public, to explain why these objects should be are important to them. Now, in terms of who this role would suit, I want to preface by saying I firmly believe that almost anybody can do any job. All you need is the desire to want to do it. A big example for me is public speaking, because that is a pillar of being a curator, is talking to the public. But I was always a very nervous public speaker. When I was doing my first internship at the V&A, one of my responsibilities was to give daily guided tours of the galleries. And I used to find it incredibly difficult. And now, 6 years later, I'm quite comfortable giving impromptu guided tours at the Barber. So time and experience are your greatest assets. So I think, now that said, in terms of who I think this would suit, I think if you have an inquiring mind and you're someone who likes to constantly question the status quo, then curatorship would suit you, because you need to constantly rethink about how you're presenting these objects to the public, and even when you're researching them, thinking of new questions for how to approach them. I also think a really important part of being a curator is being a good team player, because all the programs, the exhibitions, the displays that museums deliver, it's a team effort between curators, conservators, learning, the comms team. So you have to be able to engage in dialogue and work together as part of a big team in order to deliver these big creative visions. So yeah, be a good team player and also have an inquiring disposition. It's a wonderful job, and it's taken me a long time to get here, and I've had it can be quite it can feel almost arduous when you're going through all these internships, but at the end of the day, when I'm face to face with a work of art and discussing it with a conservator, with a member of the learning team, with a member of the public, I'm so grateful for all the years of internships I went through and all the experiences I have, because it really is unlike any other job I could imagine. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edith. That was really great. As I said before, we'll take questions at the end, and we'll move straight to our next speaker. Welcome to Jamila Briggs, who is Collections Registrar at the Whitworth Art Gallery in Manchester. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Jamila.
Hi, thanks, Christina.
And I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. And thanks very much, Edith. That was really interesting to listen to. And actually, an awful lot of what Edith has just been talking about, it really does touch upon my role as a registrar, and I work very closely with the curatorial assistants at the Whitworth Art Gallery. I do have a few slides to share, so I might put those up just as I'm talking. Sorry, just one moment. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. Okay, so I'm the registrar at the Whitworth Art Gallery. We're based in Manchester and part of Manchester University. We also have John Rylands Library and Manchester Museum. They're also part of the university. I used to work at Manchester Museum, and for the last 2 years, I've been the registrar at the Whitworth. So I'll just talk to you a little bit about what the job is about, roles and responsibilities, the kind of qualities that are needed for the job, and just a little bit about how I got into it, because probably like Edith, it wasn't necessarily the most direct route into the job that I'm doing now. So I have quite a variety of experience. Okay, so as Edith also said, it really varies depending on the size of the institution that you're working for. At the Whitworth, we are quite a large gallery, but they only have one registrar there. So I'm responsible for all of the registrarial duties at the Whitworth Art Gallery. Many others, you'll have a registrarial assistant, but it's just me at the Whitworth. And the role is very, very varied. And just on this slide, a few notes about documentation and record keeping. So one of the fundamental roles is that you've got to be responsible for the management and preservation of the collections. That's paramount, obviously, when you work in a museum and a gallery for any role, but particularly for a registrar, you've got to be very, very good at documenting information about artworks, and we always use collections management system for this sort of centralized place for information. It has to be accurately stored on the systems. Also, responsibilities to do with cataloguing new acquisitions, so updating records through the system as well, making sure that all the documentation is accurate and up to date, as I just mentioned. And that will involve things like provenance, obviously due diligence that Edith mentioned, condition reports that come in with any kind of artwork, location tracking, so when it moves around, you've got to be responsible for making sure that we know whether it's in the building or out of the building, valuations that come with those objects, and this all goes onto the management system, and it all has to be documented very clearly, because it's a shared resource for everybody at the gallery. So I'd say one of my biggest roles at the Whitworth is to do with loans out. So obviously you're involved in acquisition, so things come into the gallery all the time, and people donate things. There are various other ways that they come in. The curators and the curatorial assistants may go to an art show, for instance, and they will see an artwork that they think would fit very well into the collection and the message that the collection is trying to portray to the public. So you would be involved in the whole process of that coming into the gallery's collection. But one of the biggest parts of my job is to do with loans. I process an awful lot of loans in and loans out. So loans out are lending our objects to other institutions, and that could be within the UK or it could be internationally. And there's an awful lot that goes into that. There's quite a fine-tuned process for all of it. And just to mention a few things, as it says on this slide, is making sure that packaging is suitable. You've got to organise the transport, insurance. You have to discuss how something is displayed, and then you've got to communicate that information to the conservators who work with you at the gallery, just to make sure that everything is appropriately communicated between the different parties. And then throughout a loan period, you've got to monitor that everything is okay, because sometimes loans can vary from, say, 3 months to 6 months, and sometimes they can be longer than that. Collections, care and conservation. I work very, very closely with the conservation department at the Whitworth. And obviously ensuring the care and preservation of the collection that we do have is extremely important. So we monitor the conditions of items, and we have to look at whether preventative measures need to be undertaken. Sometimes that means sending an artwork off-site for conservation work. It just depends on the kind of work that it needs. We have to make sure that our environmental conditions and storage spaces are appropriate. So we've got to keep on top of that all of the time, and we have to document it all. And that comes with certain types of paperwork called facilities reports. We have an environmental system that records everything to do with the environmental conditions, and then we have graphs that provide readings that we can send out to potential lenders when we have an exhibition at the Whitworth. So along with that, exhibition coordination, this is a huge part of my role. I would say that this probably takes up a good 80% of my role currently. We have quite a high turnover of exhibitions at the Whitworth, and quite a lot of those involve bringing in artworks from other institutions. So I handle all of the logistics to do with this, and that involves transport, installation, de-installation, how things are displayed. I have to collaborate with teams at the Whitworth, so the curators, the conservators, the technicians, but then I also need to do that with the lenders as well. It's a really complex process, and it can be very, very complicated, especially if you're bringing in artworks from abroad. You've got to be involved in very, very detailed discussions with people, and you've got to ensure that you're providing absolutely everything and the reassurance that lenders need to make sure that you are going to look after their artworks whilst it's in your care. So that all comes down to managing paperwork, facilitating the safe arrival of an artwork or an object, and obviously the safe display whilst it is with you. So we would say, just to have a little look at the skills and qualities that you need as a registrar, the biggest one for me is having an attention to detail. It's such a methodical and meticulous job that you have to be very good at being able to just focus for very long periods of time and maintaining accurate records of things. It's so important to do that. It's really necessary just for the care of the objects within your collection and bringing in other people's artworks. With that, you've got to be very organised. You've got to multitask all the time. There is always something going on, and unforeseen things happen all the time that you have to then move away from a very important task and start working on something else. I mean, just this last week I've had that. So you don't know from one day to the next what is going to happen. Communication skills, obviously you're working with many different people. I work with external organisations all the time. So you have to communicate accurate information between people so that everybody understands what's going on. Technical proficiency, all museums and galleries, they have a collections management system. Quite often, a lot of them use the same kind of management system, but there are many of them. And spreadsheets really are my life. I've become very good at working with Excel since I started working as a registrar. They're really, really useful for collating information and communicating information so that you can document absolutely everything, and you can schedule things through spreadsheets, and then you can share those with your team. So yeah, that definitely, if you ever want to be a registrar, become an expert at Excel. So just very briefly to do with career pathways, obviously art history is an excellent start when you want to be a registrar. My background is archaeology with art history. So I started off doing my degree in archaeology and art history. After that, I actually did a teacher training in history. I became a history teacher for a period, and it became quite clear to me whilst I was doing that I wanted to take teaching into museums and galleries. So I did quite a lot of volunteer work. As Ida touched upon, you have to be prepared for a lot of unpaid work. When you decide the route that you want to go into, it's really important to try and do as much volunteer work as you can. So I actually did an internship after I did my teacher training and started working as a history teacher. So I worked part-time as a teacher, and I did an unpaid internship. And it was to do with education within museums and galleries. After I did that, I continued to do work experience. And then I did an MA in museum and art gallery studies. And it became quite clear to me as I was doing the masters that what I was really interested in was documentation and collections management and the processing of loans. I just became very interested in that. So I started tailoring my work experience. That I got some excellent opportunities to do work experience within collections management, and I built it from there. I've just mentioned entry-level positions. I worked at Manchester Museum as a collections access officer for 9 years, and that really built the foundation for me for becoming a registrar. I from the moment I started that job, I became essentially an assistant registrar and built my experience from there. So I did that for 9 years, and then I became the registrar at the Whitworth, and I've been doing that for 2 years. I did previously work at the Whitworth in a different role. I've actually been at the Whitworth for 10 years, but it's only the last 2 years that I've been a registrar. But yeah, it's a job that I absolutely love. It's very challenging, but if you are up for a challenge, and certainly if you're somebody who can work very meticulously and methodically, and you have a very good eye for detail, then absolutely it's an excellent career path. So I think has that ended the show? I don't know whether it has, Christina.
No, you still need to stop sharing.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Sorry.
That's all right. Thank you so much, Jamila.
You're welcome.
It's really helpful, really interesting, and a different perspective from what we've just heard from Edith. So thank you. So we'll move on, and we're going to think about exhibitions management. And Prachi Kapoor is exhibitions assistant at the National Portrait Gallery, or I should say she was until recently. She's now starting new adventures in around art in India, which I think she'll perhaps tell you a little bit more about as well.
Hello.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi. Can you all see me now?
We can.
Perfect. Just trying to share my screen. Oh, sorry, it's not letting me share my screen anymore. I'm so sorry for this.
What's happening? Are you seeing that? Can you see the share button at the bottom?
I can see the share
Yeah.
button. But it's doing something different from what it did before when we tested. Is it okay if I just quickly leave and then join again? I think it'll work. I am so
Okay.
sorry because we tried this like just before this started.
That's fine. We can take a couple of questions if there might be something for Jamila and Edith. Are you still there for a second? Yeah, so Jamila, I did see that there was a question about if there are any internships in the North, and so I thought you might possibly know. They don't mention whether they're specifically talking about collections management or more generally about museum roles.
Yeah, I mean, I did my internship at a very small gallery in Liverpool, and it really is a matter of just keeping an eye out for internships. They do come up all the time. Quite a lot of the time, say at the Whitworth, we work quite closely because we're part of the university. We work closely with students who are doing museum studies and art gallery studies, and we do. It's like a work placement with those students. There are other opportunities that do come up, but I really would say just, keep an eye out for things that do come up. They're everywhere. It's just finding the right one for you, and also make sure you're looking out for the one that you have an interest in.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks, Jamila. You saved me from having to do a tap dance or something. Looks like we're good to go.
Sorry, is it working now?
Yeah, you were on full screen a second ago, and you just need to go back onto it again.
Okay,
That's it.
perfect.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so just because I can't see myself, so I'm just seeing a screen. So if I hesitate, please do ignore me. So I am talking about being an exhibition assistant right now. I will move on to what I'm currently doing slightly later during the show. So both the previous speakers have very clearly explained what happens in an exhibition and as a curator and what a registrar role is. So at NPG, that's the National Portrait Gallery, my role was something slightly different. And as closer to being a recent graduate, once I got the role, I understood the difference between it. So I'm going to clarify something very quickly, is that exhibitions are temporary shows that happen in museums, whereas it's slightly different from the permanent collection that exists in museums as well. So these tend to be either free or paid roles. So it's also a way of museums generating wealth to just run more exhibitions, to be honest. So my role was divided into administrative and practical support, with administrative being coordinating with the registrars or preparing loan forms, assisting with letters that go out and maintaining a database, which Jamila mentioned is a space where all the information goes relating to a particular exhibition or an object, which is then used by the rest of the team and to update information about what's happening with the lenders or where the loan has processed. And then we have practical support with the installation of exhibitions and sometimes even acting as a known courier, where you actually travel with a work from one place to another and make sure everything's happening the way you want it to happen. So lucky for me, I had an excellent team of managers that I worked with. So the whole team was divided with a head of department. We had 8 managers, 2 exhibition officers, and then there was me. Ironically, the head of department and me were the only 2 people who worked across all projects. And because I had such a supportive team, it was very easy for me to jump in and out of different projects. So I worked around 14 projects. So when I'm talking about projects, I mean exhibitions, and you think these exhibitions just happen overnight or in a few months' time, which is furthest away from the truth. And this was very exciting for me to learn as my role developed. So an average time that it took at National Portrait Gallery for an exhibition from ideation to an execution was around 5 to 7 years. And I know that sounds like a lot, but it is a lot of things, a lot of background admin and practical support that runs through for an exhibition to finally take place. And that's when you have different departments helping out. So each museum runs very differently from my experience. And at NPG, the curatorial team, the registrar team, was separate from the exhibition team. What I mean is, our team was focused and worked primarily as project managers, somewhat equivalent of project managers, where we were the key point of contact with external bodies and the whole department. So anything related to the temporary exhibitions went via our team to the rest of the department. That is when somebody like Jamila, so if, for example, I need something from the Manchester Museum, I would reach out to the registrars, and all the information that they give us with the handling of the object or anything related to the object, from loans to approval to even transportation, all goes via our team to the rest of the teams. So as daunting as it sounds, it is a very important role to make sure that all the information is then correctly updated in the database, which becomes a Bible of some sorts. So just, I'm trying not to be too technical so that you understand it is much more fun than it looks, but there is a lot of work that goes in, and that's how the exhibitions that you attend makes all the difference. So the curation team deals with the ideation and is mostly mostly research heavy, and they give out all the information. So we take the ideation of the curator and we make it happen, if that makes sense. So we remind them of practical financial constraints or other understandings. So when we get this information, we have this so as an exhibition assistant, I would prepare the exhibition project management meetings every month, which are representative of each department. So when I say department, it can be somebody in charge of publications, where the catalog is being formed, or the security team when the exhibition is going to come up. So this is how the role goes. And one of the things you need to do is you need to be up for any challenge. And also, one of the key things that I learned, and which goes beyond just exhibition management as well, is do a task properly. So when I say I'm able to do multitasking, it just means do one task completely properly to a high standard, and being flexible enough to move to a different task with a different project. So that's my role. And honestly, it was a lot of fun, because being the center of the team, or the central sort of project management role, you end up working alongside every department, and you understand how the whole exhibition runs and how each department fills a position in a overall exhibition. Like I mentioned, I worked in over 14 exhibitions, but while I was there, the gallery was closed for redevelopment, and we had the most grand opening, which started with Paul McCartney exhibition, which was a lot of fun, because we launched the Beatles star from a singer to a photographer. And during COVID, they had found an archive of his photos, and they had reached out to us, and we had combined with them and worked with a very stellar team to create this exhibition. So that was definitely a highlight of my career, with even meeting Paul McCartney and his funny jokes for the opening. Other exhibitions, I also did an MA in art history, and I learned about Julia, uh, Francesca Woodman, and even Cameron as photographers. So from learning about these people to actually working so closely with their artworks was also a lot of fun and exciting. And as daunting as these names sometimes sound, you learn to work alongside a very different team, and you need to be flexible as well. And I think in the art field, one of the best thing is a lot of people here are there because of being passionate about art. So you meet personalities, but really welcoming personality, who wants the best for the museums, for the galleries, and a very welcoming atmosphere. So anytime when you feel like, oh, I need to understand this better, there is an environment of growth and communication that is open. So when I was working for the exhibition team, we also used to receive a lot of exhibition proposals from the public. So these proposals would come to me, and I would inform the head department and work closely with the curators to see which ones we can take forward or not. So that added another element of working closely with different teams and just understanding that when an exhibition happens, what all goes in and what all goes through. Another exhibition that I would love to just talk very briefly about is The Time Is Always Now, which is how Black figures was seen in the museum spaces and how it changed the narration. So this was a group show, and biggest skill you need with group shows is being an excellent communicator, and just taking a back seat and just letting my managers handle it, and even being involved with different artists, you pick up and learn a lot. So you need to be a learner and a listener at the same time, which was fun. And as far as I can tell, a lot of the listeners right now either are just completing their undergrad, masters, A levels, or changing in their career. So this is a little closer to what you will experience before you become like a full-fledged curator or a registrar or take on higher higher responsibility roles. So this is when you have your fun and you learn what you love and what you don't love about the industry and the roles that are coming your way. So one last project. So one of the things as an assistant that was happening was I was working on multiple projects, and I kept dipping in and out of one or the other. And there was a time when the officer had just left and there was a space of working for me that I wanted to explore. So I approached my team and the competitions. So every year, the gallery has two competitions, and that is called Taylor Messing Photographic Portrait Prize Awards. And with the absence of an officer, I took on more responsibilities for these competitions and was officially, these competitions became a part of the exhibition assistant roles now. So I just expanded the responsibilities of an assistant, where you worked for these competitions, or currently all the assistants work for the competitions from the start to the end. So what the gallery does is it has an open call every year, and over 4,000 submissions take place, with each artist being able to submit up to 6 works. And you become the first point of contact, and your manager is the other one. So two of you work very closely, answer very interesting questions that the artists have regarding the rules, and help them submit their works. Once the works are in, you work again very closely with the judges, and you help them reduce 4,000 works to 300 shortlisted selections. And then the artist submits a physical print of these works, and that's when you work with 5 renowned artists who come in as judges along with the director of the gallery acting as one of the judge for these competitions. And they select 50 works, which then become an exhibition, and you work alongside the curators, and this is your moment. This was my career highlight, another career highlight of working very closely with the artists who are then shortlisted and answering questions, understanding the curation process to the execution, from installing works, that's putting on the works in the museum walls, letting people come in the opening nights, answer questions, and just live the moment. Yeah. So how did I get here? Is I did my undergrad and masters at University of Birmingham. I did my undergrad in art history and English literature because I wanted to be flexible with what I wanted to do more ahead in life. I fell in love with art history all over again because that was not a subject that I got in India. So I'd moved to UK for this. And for my master's, I went and did a master's in curating and art history. Following the master's, I got an internship at Roundhouse Gallery and Icon Gallery in Birmingham, where I worked for a few months. And then I applied for NPG. But while I was doing my master's, I was very active, or even undergrad, I was a very active student. I was the student rep, student ambassador, and the universities give a lot of volunteering, paid and unpaid opportunities to interns and their students. So I made sure I grabbed all of them, or as many as I could, to be honest. I worked across 13 organizations while I was studying, and then eventually got this role. The reason I pushed myself so was because I wanted to understand what I am good at, what I want to do, and most importantly, what I don't like doing. So that's one of the things you need to understand: what you enjoy, what you don't enjoy, and then just be open to whatever opportunities come your way. So working as an operations team member to giving spotlight tours at Icon, I did a bit of everything. I also managed volunteers while I was doing that. So these are people that are very ambitious and want to be there and are there to learn. So just being available for them, understanding, and that's basically what I was doing. And being an excellent communicator helped me get where I am right now and even flourish in the role I was. So currently, after working in organizations of heritage sites, museums, galleries, I decided that I want to explore the commercial side a bit more, just to get a better understanding. And that's when I moved to India and was thrown in a very different environment, in a very vibrant art scene. And I am currently freelancing with a gallery as a communication associate. And I'm being trained to become a gallerist. So fingers crossed that goes well. And I'm learning a very different way of working and scenes and the motivations behind a commercial gallery and a museum and the different ways of working, where in a smaller scale commercial galleries, instead of having departments doing different things for you, you become a one-man show and you end up doing a lot more and learning a lot more with it. So having worked in a museum, instead of a different section, I worked with a lot of different departments, which prepared me for my current role, where I feel confident enough to handle all the things thrown at me, but also train and then hopefully own my own space somewhere in the future, where I work with a lot of artists and can help them get to the museums and galleries where they would eventually want to leave a legacy behind. Thank you so much for inviting me. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Prachi. That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much. So we'll move straight on to our next speaker, who is Ed Dickinson. He's a gallery educator at the National Gallery and my former colleague, in fact.
Hello, thank you so much, Christina. Thank you so much, everyone else speaking as well. Yeah, Christina and I used to work together, and that might give you a bit of an insight into, opportunities within the sector. I think her putting up with all of my terrible jokes for years and years, and hopefully competence in my role, and to invite me to speak to something like this. But every person you meet is an opportunity. Every person, you never know what sort of path could take you on. For all I know, Christina approached 5 other people before me to try and do this talk, and they all said no. So I'm going to act as if I'm the first choice. I just hope I am. But you never know with these things. So it is almost 10 years to the day as well. From doing this talk 10 years ago, almost to the day, I was a rather sad primary school teacher. I loved teaching, and I am now a gallery educator at the National Gallery. And it has been a very strange and exciting 10 years. But I was thinking about all the sort of routes that took me here and how that's all worked out. So let's just have a little bit of a whistle-stop silly tour through the wonderful things I get to do, and hopefully ways in which it might help you looking towards, years of wonderful careers that you might be embarking on. So I'm a gallery educator, which means I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher in the National Gallery in London. We have our wonderful collection of Western European art from the last 800 years. A lot of it is quite inaccessible for a lot of people. There's a lot of old saints and mythological figures, or figures that seem very different to our general walks of life. So we are always trying to think of ways to engage the public, because fundamentally, I think all of us who work in museums and galleries, we work in public engagement. If we are at the coalface, so to speak, meeting members of the public, obviously, yes, but also if you're conserving the works, if you're researching into the works, if we're thinking about exhibitions and all of the stuff, if you're doing security and events and just keeping the lights on in the place, all of this is in service of the public and people coming in and having encounters with this art. The National Gallery is owned by you. It belongs to the public, so we have a duty to engage people. So as a gallery educator, I get to do brilliantly teaching across all sectors. So that might be primary school groups. Here I am talking with secondary school group. I love this chap at the back who's just slowly losing his mind over the diptych that we were having a look at, because we were looking at some crazy tiny details. Here is my former colleague, Mark, doing some fantastic things for primary school kids in the gallery. We get people off their feet. We get all sorts of fun and games. We work with families, communities, practical art sessions, special educational needs group. This is a boat that Mark and I built in a little breakout space we had to try and experience the Turner, and we were throwing water at the children and crashing thunder drums and waves and all sorts of things like that. We also work with adults. We do lecture series, in-gallery talks. We do Friday lates. We do music, singing, dancing. We do Q&A sessions. We do making sessions, all sorts of different things that go on. We have a huge online program and offsite. At the moment, we've got our art road trip. My colleagues are driving around the country at the moment in a van, going to communities and people who haven't really had much access to the National Gallery or arts provision in general. And we are going to different centres and just opening up maybe in a village square and having free drop-in art activities. We get to do online sessions like this. We teach in people's classrooms and people's homes. We even have, our social media, and the poor fools, like idiots like me, onto the social media channels to think about how we might represent things, which is a lovely opportunity for gallery educators and learning teams to represent things online, to try and talk about paintings in a slightly different way, because I'm not a curator. I mean, I've studied art history, but I'm not a great, I don't have a PhD behind me, but I love all the stories and I love engaging with people, and I'm always learning. So how on earth do we get here? I've had a really weird route. I mean, my route really is, and I'm going to talk more about sort of the options and things we can do in the gallery, but I could say I did an art history undergraduate degree, and then I did a teaching postgraduate degree. So brilliant. That's how you become a teacher in art history. But that's a little bit disingenuous, because there's about 20 years of flailing about and really not knowing what I was doing with myself and being rather sad and going off down all sorts of different avenues. Everything kind of forms who you are, even the, the dead ends, everything can, be something that you can really learn from. And 20 years ago, when I was applying for degrees, I was absolutely sure I wanted to do English literature, but I didn't have the grades for English literature because I needed 3 A's back then. And my teachers were very sure I was not going to get 3 A's. So I looked at, thanks to my mum, because she had done a joint honours with English Lit and art history. I loved art history, but I'd never studied it formally. So those of you who are currently studying it, maybe as an A-level, what fantastic opportunity. I knew I loved it, but I thought this would be a way for me to be able to get into university a little easier. I mucked up my exams and I ended up getting rejected from both of my first and second choices. So I got on the phone through clearing, and the wonderful Manchester University, so big up Jamila and the Whitworth, they said they'd offer me a place, but they couldn't do a joint honours. It was just art history. So I had to make this choice. Am I just going to do art history? And luckily I was very fortunate that studying a degree that I wasn't sure would be super vocational, it was something to enjoy the history and the the knowledge of it, I absolutely adored all of this. And it was, it was something that I'd been supported by my parents to go into. And I thought, great, okay, let's do this. I had a brilliant 3 years, but was quite sure when I left that it wasn't something that was going to direct me into a particular career unless I did more. And my lecturers said, you know, you've got to be doing an MA. You've got to be doing an MA in museums and education. You've got to be doing an MA in curating. You've got to be getting involved with that. That was kind of the path back then. And I couldn't afford to do an MA, and I wasn't sure about doing an extra year. I had sort of weird nebulous designs of being a writer maybe, but basically I moved back in with my parents. And a few years later, I got to go abroad and teach English in Japan. Well, hey, what a wonderful new thing. But again, disingenuous. I spent 2 years looking for some sort of other avenue, and someone had suggested, hey, maybe teaching might be something you'd like to do. And going to Japan, I thought, yeah, this sounds brilliant. And the JET program, who I went with, saw me coming a mile off and said, no, absolutely not. And I got rejected twice, ended up on a waiting list. Really started to make more of an effort to look into the teaching side of things and what was needed from this. As you can probably tell, I was a bit of a silly young man. And I was given an option at the very last minute to go out to Japan. I mean, I think I had something like 3 weeks from receiving the call to quitting my job, to packing up everything, to standing in front of 500 kids in a classroom 5,000 miles away. So it was just whirlwind. And I found out later that 6 different people had been rejected from this position, had turned it down before I got accepted. So you can tell I've got a little bit of imposter syndrome with some of these, but you know what? You've got to treat it like you were the first choice. And I went in and I made it my own, and I had the best time. Most importantly, I discovered teaching. And so silly, having not had the opportunity. So many of our speakers have spoken about the internships, trying different things, just doing it, trying this on for size is so important. And I knew that teaching was something I'd really like to pursue. I came back to the UK, did my postgraduate certificate of education, went into primary school teaching, and there we went. And then it all kind of went wrong. I taught for many years, and I just thought, I think this is kind of unsustainable. I couldn't deal with the hours. I loved teaching, but I really struggled, and, you know, really probably needed some therapy and a bit more help. But I thought, what can I do? And 10 years ago, I made the choice to leave the classroom and take a sideways step, because I'd been given the opportunity during my teacher degree to do a 1-week placement at the National Gallery, which was amazing. And funnily enough, years later, I've ended up teaching on the course that I originally attended years ago. But I got to see what teaching and learning looks like outside of the classroom. And for the first time in ages, really apply my art history degree. And I'd always loved it. I'd always loved looking at things critically. I'd always loved history. But this was a point where I thought, I could use this. I'd used it in the classroom. So I thought, you know what? Let's take a sideways step. I applied, got rejected everywhere. No one really answered any of my calls because they said, you've got to have been working in the sector. It was so difficult. And a very small gallery took a chance on me for 3 days a week. So I took a massive pay cut, and I tried to find work elsewhere, trying to support myself for the next couple of days a week. But I got to try all sorts of things in a very small learning team in a very small gallery. It was quite possibly the museum equivalent of the kitchen in The Bear, if anyone's watched that. It was absolutely bonkers and brilliant and stressful and everything else. And that just changed my CV. I had so many different opportunities to say, oh, I've done a bit of this and I've done a bit of that. And it led to a role at the Horniman Museum, which was my great love. I absolutely adored it. And I thought, oh, I finally made it as a gallery educator. And I got to work with schools at the Horniman. And then my old art teacher got in touch, talking about, you know, always keeping communication open. My old art teacher, who I worked with on my postgraduate teacher training, sent me an email out of the blue, because he's the one who'd set me up on the National Gallery course all those years ago, and said, there's a job going at the National Gallery. I'd been scouring the Leicester University job ads for ages and hadn't really found much. And then this came up, and I thought, oh, just when I'm happy. And I went, and yeah, got a job at this place, was extremely happy, and I've never looked back. And I've sat on this job like an egg because it's wonderful. And the chance to do things. I know this sounds completely random, and sometimes doing these talks doesn't seem very helpful for people starting off, because how on earth can you plan for something like that? But through all sorts of random rejections, I've been very fortunate to be able to hold on to certain things and spot new opportunities coming up, and had some very kind people looking out for me. So, you know, keep those contacts going. I will still email Rob, that wonderful tutor, every now and then. We'll chat and have a coffee and see how he's doing. In fact, I must email him now. I haven't spoken to him in ages. But you know, we can talk more about what I sort of do at the gallery. I want to make sure the next person can talk. But you never really know where it might take you. And now I get to do something where I still teach, I still get to apply all the things I've done, but I constantly get to change, and I'm supported, and I work in a wonderful group. And if I get bored of a certain painting, I could do something different. And they'll, you know, even let me muck about online with puppets. So who knows where these things can take you? And we'll talk more about some top tips and things like that, but stay open. Good luck. And yeah, I look forward to chatting a bit more. Okay, thank you.
I love the idea of you sitting on this job like an egg. That's great. Sitting, yeah.
Absolutely.
But thank you so much, Ed. So we'll come back to you in a few minutes. But first, we're going to hear from Jack Chauncey, who is doing a graduate internship at the Guildhall Art Gallery in London on as the paintings conservator. You're welcome, Jack.
Hiya. I'll just share my screen if I can. Just give me a shout if you can see this. Any good? Okay, so thanks, Christina, and thanks to all the previous speakers. I'm Jack, and I'm a paintings conservator. So I'll talk a little bit about what I do now and describe how I got here. But first to say, I'm perhaps at the start of my career compared to the previous speakers. And I don't know, that might be slightly helpful for some of you guys if you're doing your A-levels or undergrad to see what it's like perhaps at the start. Although I would preface that to say that perhaps conservation is you get into it in a slightly different way because it's a more specialized, perhaps a craft-based discipline than the other disciplines that we've heard about. But it's so good to hear about sort of richness of people's experience so far. So yes, I'm the current paintings conservation intern at the Guildhall Gallery, which is home to the Corporation of the City of London's art collection. So that comprises about 1,500 oil paintings, and their remit is to speak about the history of London and the people who live and work there. It's a free gallery, and I really recommend that you visit if you haven't gone before. It's quite little known. And here I'm standing in front in this picture of a painting from the gallery's collection, which I am currently in the process of treating. It's by a lesser known 19th century artist called James Holmes and depicts Charing Cross in 1832. I've just removed quite a substantial amount of yellowed varnish and historic overpaint from this painting. And following restoration, it should be ready to go on display. But I'll just pause there and sort of reflect on, I suppose, why we look after paintings and how that role as a paintings conservator exists within the wider infrastructure of a museum. And as I said, the remit, the purpose of that collection at the Guildhall Art Gallery is to tell a story about the people who live and work in London and have lived and worked in London in the past. And this painting was chosen by the director, Liz Scott, to be treated because it depicts a focal place, which is now Trafalgar Square. It tells a story about changing modes of transport, and it also depicts a young black man in a respectable manner, in a professional role, and perhaps in a livery that is associated with the City of London. So I suppose, as someone who works in the public and private sector in conservation, what appeals to me, what's always appealed to me about working in a museum is being a part of that accessibility and and the idea of looking after something and making it accessible for now and for the future is an important part of that. So to move on, as other people have said, Edith said that it's a very mixed role. That's certainly the case in our museum, which is a very small team of perhaps 4 or 5 people. So although I'm working in the painting conservation department, we sometimes perform the role of registrar here, art handler, and exciting conservation treatments can be a relatively small part of what a museum conservator does to look after collections, particularly, as I said, in a smaller institution. And as previous speakers have said, we work to maintain a safe environment for the display of paintings through what's known as preventative conservation. And this is also the case when artworks are loaned to other institutions, as this painting, like L'Inondata by Dante Gabriel Rossetti, was. Here it's just coming back from Delaware. And during my internship, I've worked on several loans of paintings, such as a large group of pre-Raphaelites. Pre-Raphaelite works are quite well represented in the collection that travelled to Forlì in Italy, and a group of Matthew Smith paintings, which were displayed in Charleston Farmhouse. So besides my work at the Guildhall, I am a freelance painting conservator, and I primarily work at Art Discovery, which is a company that specialises in technical art history. In this role, I employ various methods of material analysis and imaging to collect detailed information about the construction and composition of artworks. And this information can inform attributions and support historical research into artist technique. And in some cases, it can also assist with practical conservation. And I also have my own conservation studio in East London, which is where I am right now. And I take on work there independently. It's very close to where I grew up in Forest Gates. And so this seems to be a good time to describe my route into working in conservation so far. First found out about conservation while on a summer university run by the Courtaulds, which is a program that still exists for state school students interested in art history. And at the time, I was at one of the few state schools in London that actually did art history. It was City and Islington sixth form. So it's great to hear about the sort of education programs from Ed, and that outreach is really important. So if any opportunities like that do come up, I do recommend giving it a go. But I think it was my mum on that occasion that sort of enrolled me or encouraged me to enroll. But I'm very grateful to her, because that is where I first discovered this as a field. It wasn't something that I was aware about at all before that. And up until that point, I suppose I was already interested in the idea of museum work, and I had some work experience at the British Museum and the John Soane Museum, where I'd sort of been introduced to museum management systems and the idea of cataloguing, documentation. But it was seeing the conservation studios and that practice in person that really made an impression on me, that I continue to return to as an idea of pursuing this as a career. And I suppose I took that idea of craft and a focus on materials into my further studies as I went to the Royal Drawing School and City and Guilds of London Art School, both of which places have a focus on technical skill. And certainly at City and Guilds, I was surrounded by skilled craftspeople, be them sort of stone carvers or printmakers, and I think that encouraged me to focus my energies into developing a particular discipline. So eventually I was very fortunate after my undergrad. This is not always the case, and as we've heard, it can be a very circuitous route. But I was very fortunate in my case to apply to the course and get on straight after my BA. Unfortunately, when you get a place, it's the first time you have to consider paying the tuition fees. And the reality for me was I couldn't afford to pay for them. I couldn't rely on family help to pay for them. And I do worry that, this is something that will deter people from applying at all. It's a very expensive course and it's 3 years full time. And again, I mean, my experience in this case was there are sources of funding you can apply to, and I very fortunately applied to all the funding that I could and got it fully paid. So I would say, if there's something you really want to do, give it a go and just try and apply for funding, I think. And also reach out to these institutions, because they want you to, if you want to be on the course, I think they want you to, and if they offer you a place, they will assist you in that. But obviously I had the additional privilege of being from London, which isn't a cheap place to live by any means, so I could stay at home. But don't let it deter you. So the course is 3 years full time, as I said, with 5 or 6 students in each year group, structured in a way that introduces you to materials and historic technique through replica making and close observation. You're introduced to methods of technical examination and documentation, and then given your first painting to work on. And at first, your work's closely supported by tutors, but throughout the 3 years, you'll work increasingly independently to the point where you can devise and implement conservation treatments on your own. And as well as practical work, the Courtauld is an environment where research is always taking place. My research thesis was on the application of Raman and Fourier transform infrared spectrometry on pre-existing samples from the Courtauld Cézanne collection. And although I came to conservation from a fine art background, that science aspect has always been something that has really appealed to me. And yeah, the Courtauld course does give an excellent grounding in the application of scientific analysis to works of art. I suppose I'm going to wrap up here, and if you've got any questions, then that would be great. But I would reiterate what everyone said about seeking out experience and really exposing yourself to different roles, because you could happen upon something that really speaks to you, and it could really shape what you do from that point. So definitely email people, try and ask if you can volunteer places. I know at the Guildhall we always accept volunteers. So I suppose that is one tip that I will leave on now. But thank you so much for listening. I know it's running a bit late, so I'll end now.
Thank you so much, Jack. And I'll ask the other panelists now to come back on to join us for the Q&A. And thank you so much, Jack, for raising the financial barriers of the course, which I think is really, important to address. And I thought we might kick off with a difficult question. Really, I suppose for all of the panelists or anyone who feels they can respond to this, what can you do if you cannot afford to do low paid or even unpaid internships? And is this still the norm? Is anything being done to make these opportunities more accessible, so that we don't just continue to perpetuate this cycle of privilege or drive others into financial difficulties? Yeah, really tough question, but do you have thoughts about how you can get into this if you just can't work for free?
Just a couple of things to say about that, really. I mean, I absolutely understand this, but I think probably one thing to say is that for an awful lot of cultural institutions, the reason that internships are unpaid or they need to take on volunteers, it's not necessarily because they want to perpetuate this idea of roles being for a certain category of people. It's because of budgets. There's not a huge amount of money within the cultural sector, and that's the only way that they can bringing people for experience. Certainly when I was starting out, there is no way that I could have done any of my volunteer work or the internship that I did without working as well. I have worked all the way through my path into the career that I'm doing. My internship was 1 day a week. I worked as a teacher in addition to doing that. The volunteer work that I've done, I did 1 day a week here and there. I continue to teach as I was doing that. So I always had to work whilst trying to fit in a bit of volunteer work as well. The other thing I would say is that a career in the cultural sector, on the whole, is not that well paid. You know, some roles are better than others, but it's not on the whole a very well paid profession. So if you're wanting a job that is well paid, it's perhaps not quite the sector to work in. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone else wanted to respond to that as well.
But just I think to echo what Jamila was saying, yeah, budgets are tight and it's very difficult. I'm very fortunate to be at the National Gallery. I've seen so many other colleagues lose jobs, work in institutions where they are just having to punch so high above their weight to get anything done. One person running an entire program. So, you know, really, we're so fortunate where we are. And I think that means it's the duty of places that are larger to offer paid positions. The gallery is doing more, and we have been trying to sort of pressure for a bit more. We've had a series of sort of trainee placements directly offered to people receiving tax credits, receiving, you know, on lower income thresholds. And we've had some phenomenal people come from a real range of backgrounds who now have jobs at the gallery or have had an opportunity, but it's still quite small. And I think it's something to really push across the sector, because as you say, unless those things change, you will see the same sort of people applying for the roles. A breadth in what galleries can do. We work with a lot more people, online creators as well. And I think we've seen a lot of people, you know, just trying to do their own thing and advertise themselves through social media. And that in itself brings its whole realm of problems of what even is a work hour if you're working online like that constantly. But yeah, I think things need to change, and they need, you know, people within our profession to push for that change, because it is unfortunately a very difficult field to get into for so many. Sorry if that sounds a bit depressing, but we can do things.
Can I just add something very quickly about this? So I think it's also the responsibilities of the organizations. And this is a conversation that has happened in important board meetings. And what a solution that the companies are looking into is getting sponsors from outside to fund or sponsor the internships so that they're more durable. But again, it is at talking stages, and I really hope that more organizations, commercial or private, starts taking it on, because a lot of high institutions have fundings to help community building. So once they are tapped in a nicer way or a strategic way, maybe just to promote themselves, hopefully they can take and share that burden. And please use your transferable skills. So when you're doing other roles while you're working, just don't think if you're a waiter or you manage a bar or something, you can't use that to get into the museum sector. People are open to it, maybe not at a senior level, but in the assistant roles. They are happy when you're not coming just from an academic background of art history or otherwise. Just sell your transferable skills well.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Patchy. So there's another difficult question. So somebody's asking, with so few museum jobs coming up, can you share your thoughts on what can prevent us from getting jobs? So this person has a museology PhD and practical curating experience. They want to get into curating, but they have been struggling for a while now. So this might be a question for Edith, but it might be a question for any of you, really.
I would say it sounds like this person has a terrific background, like they've got everything they need. It's just the case of competition. And this was something that I found really hard. I wish I could list for you the number of rejections I got, the number of jobs I went for. Again, it took me 2 years of solid interning and then several years of working in exhibitions, constantly applying for jobs. It's the competitiveness, the number of applications you get for every single role. And just because you haven't gotten one role one time, I would say it doesn't mean you're not going to get it the next time, because having now had the opportunity to be on both sides of the interviewing panel, it's all about the pool of candidates. So there might be someone coming up who just edges you out in one time that the role comes up. You just have to really dig your heels in and have faith that it will come around eventually. But it's the competition. That person's profile sounds terrific. You will ultimately get there, but it's a long, hard struggle.
So there was a question for you, Edith, about curating, and it was about how there are so many more kind of installation exhibitions now, multi-sensory exhibitions, different kind of art mediums, and whether that kind of changes the role of the curator and how kind of involved you have to be with the kind of technical aspects of bringing in those different mediums or ways in which people experience the exhibition.
Yeah, I would say that's really, really topical, and something we're talking a lot about at my work at the moment. And that is something as part of the curatorial team, and also working closely with exhibitions and learning, you do have to keep on top of. So yeah, the curator would be really involved in that. And actually, I would say it's really important to think about from an accessibility point of view. And that's something that we're thinking about a lot in terms of ways other than just using labeled text to allow people to access artworks. And as the curator, you would be closely involved, probably researching the technology, how you would fund it, how it would be, like all the practical stuff as well. Sorry, I'm not sure if I've quite answered the question. Could you repeat it again?
It was about the sort of rise of more kind of multi-sensory or multimedia exhibitions. I'm thinking even of the exhibition you have coming up, which I'm curating on Scent at the Barber Institute, Scent and the Pre-Raphaelites. So with that exhibition, I mean to turn this into talking about myself, but there's going to be a way of experiencing perfume in while looking at paintings. So I think that's the kind of thing that person's talking about, is how kind of involved you have to be with the kind of mechanisms of installing and thinking through how these are going to work in the exhibition space.
Yeah, I think you do have to be quite closely involved. And again, you'd be working very closely with the exhibitions team, who would be helping a lot with the practical application of it, and thinking about, as we were talking about recently, where it's going to fit in the space, how it affects other people's viewing of the artworks. That's a really major part of curation, not just the works on the wall, but the other ways of accessing it. It's all part and parcel of what's going on in the gallery.
Great, thank you. What else? There's a question for Jack that's about applying to the Courtauld, but I think I'll send that to you directly, Jack, if that's all right.
Yeah,
I think
no
that's
problem.
probably the most helpful way of dealing with that. So I think we could move on now. We've just got 5 minutes left. And I hope that you could each give a kind of top tip that you might have for people who are just setting out and thinking about working in your particular field. What would be a top tip be? So I'll start with you, Jack.
Yeah, I think it would be to reach out to people and ask to visit. I mean, if you want to get an understanding of what it is to be a conservator, reach out to studios and just ask to come round and have a cup of tea. I think that's probably the top tip I would give, and that applies to museums as well, who I'm sure would be happy to accommodate you. I mean, we would.
Because conservators often have a tea break for a clock, or at
several
least that was
times a day.
traditional in institutions. I don't know how much that still happens, but
Well, we have one, yeah, maybe twice a day. It is true. And you know what? It's
everyone kind of
useful.
drops out tools and sits together.
Yeah, especially if you're looking at a painting that's about this far in front of you. And in fact, if you're using solvents to clean a painting, then having a timetable break is actually quite a good thing.
So
But yeah,
maybe
there is
people
some
can
truth
go
to
and
that.
visit during that time.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Ed, you're next on my screen.
I had a lovely piece of advice from my dad ages ago, which he said, don't make plans, just know what a good opportunity is when it turns up. And I think you probably should make plans in a lot of ways, but the point he was making with it was is don't be so rigid that, you know, when something's not working out, you think, oh God. Because, you know, I think a lot of us have. I was at a point where I thought, I've got a career. This is where I'm going. And I'd finally found it. And I'm like, it's not working out. And I don't think it's sustainable. But you find other ways of, and yeah. So wait for those good opportunities, but also you've got to look for those good opportunities, you know. Is there anyone you invite? We can invite people to Zoom calls now, if you can take them out for a coffee, but just be that polite person, just saying, oh, do you mind awfully asking, how did you get there? Those opportunities start coming up a little bit more frequently the more you put yourself out. But yeah, hang in there. Really do hang in there. It is hard stuff, but good luck.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I can think of people who've done that really well and who I continue to support because they made that that kind of move in the first place. Jamila?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would echo really what Ed and Jack have just said. Certainly knock on doors. I mean, I did that when I was looking for opportunities. I contacted lots of places. A lot didn't want anybody to come in for any kind of volunteer work. They didn't have capacity to have anybody at that time, but I just kept trying and I found something. But, you know, if you just want to have a chat with somebody, just, you know, have a look on museum and gallery websites for contact details. Just drop somebody an email and say, have you got 5 minutes for a chat, or, you know, whatever. Everybody is always open to have a talk about what they do, or you know, just go through any kind of questions or queries about working in the field. I mean, absolutely just put yourself out there, and don't wait for opportunities to come up. Just have a look, and also be patient. It can take a long time to get to where you are. I mean, I started out as a teacher and now I'm a registrar. It's taken a while to get to that point, but you will find it eventually. You've just got to explore different avenues.
Yeah, there have been several questions from career changers asking how to kind of make a move in, and I think that tip of kind of just asking for a coffee with someone is a good idea. That's what I did when I wanted to make a change from teaching into museum learning.
Yeah,
really helpful. Prachi.
Hi. One thing I would say is just don't assume your skills as well. Put yourself out there, try it out, and then understand what you like or you don't like. Like, a lot of people think that public speaking is scary unless you do it, and then it comes very naturally. So when you're reaching people out, it's going to be uncomfortable. The worst they can say is no, it's fine. The next person is going to say yes. So just be sure of and have a thicker skin when people say no. That's all.
And see you for a second. Okay, and Edith, thank you.
Sorry, I'm going to sound like a broken record because before I go into this, that was my top tip as well. And just having learned from experience, absolutely reach out to people, because again, actually in some ways I would say it can be more difficult in London because you have all these really big museums. They're not really going to take people just knocking on doors. So see what's going on locally with local museums, archives, other cultural institutions. Reach out, because also everybody working in the arts has been in your place at some point, and everybody is really keen to help someone else. I can't tell you how kind people have been to me when I've reached out to them. And I understand it's also really hard if you're an introverted person. I think I wasted or I lost a lot of time waiting for opportunities. And actually people are really kind. And even if one connection doesn't lead to the chance to volunteer, they'll keep you in mind and recommend you to someone else. Also, just in terms of more practical tips, again, things I've learned the hard way. When you go to an interview, as painful as it is, the second you come out, write down all the questions and try and remember what your answers are and build a bank so that you can remember, oh, they asked me about this and I didn't actually have a good answer for that, or that's an area where I can try and build on my experience. Keeping a sort of a logbook of things that you're learning, because it's hard to keep it all in your mind, and keep scouring the Leicester Museum's jobs desk. They post things every Thursday. There's lots of opportunities on there, and yeah, make your own opportunities by reaching out to people. And I get how painful it is when you're an introvert. I was at a conference this week and I kept having to tell myself, just go up and talk to people because you don't know what will come. And really be patient. It takes a long time, and your peers working in other career, like other sectors, don't always understand how difficult it is, that there isn't much progression, that you do have to intern for a long time. You just have to keep the faith.
Keep the faith. Wonderful. Thank you. That's really good great tips from all of you. Thank you. I'm going to give my own as well. Which is to ask if you really want to be a curator. And I say this because I think when you're studying art history as an undergraduate or at A-level, it's probably the best known role. And I think people tend to use the word as a shorthand for museum work of all sorts. But actually, perhaps what would suit you is one of the other roles that we've heard about today. You know, maybe it would be museum education or exhibition design or fundraising or marketing or visitor operations. You know, museums even need accountants and lawyers and IT people and building estate managers, to just kind of think about whether it's the museum environment that appeals to you or the curator's work per se, perhaps. So in our next event, which will be on next careers event on Saturday the 21st of September, and that will also be online 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. and we'll be covering more roles in museums and arts organisations. So we'll look at some of the key support roles, such as fundraising, marketing and communications, event organisation, digital experience, operations management. So I'll send you a link for that. I'll also be sending you a feedback form. I'd be really grateful if you could spend a few minutes just filling that in. And then finally, I just want to tell you about a project that I've been working on. So this year is the 50th anniversary of the AAH. And to celebrate, we're creating a series of 50 careers videos under the umbrella Art History Now. And these will be going on to TikTok, Instagram and YouTube. These each feature an individual who studied art history, who's talking about their role now. So these feature a whole range of roles, from what I would call the more kind of obvious roles for art history, like curator and auction specialist, and other key art world roles, but also many less obvious routes for art history graduates, including everything from finance analyst, lawyer, solicitor, perfumer, and even an undertaker. So it just kind of goes to show that you can really do anything with an art history degree, and there are so many ways in which the skills that you gain on an art history degree can be transferable. So I am going to send you a link to YouTube, where we've put 20 of those videos up, but we are going to be starting to release those on social media in August. So if you follow us now, as soon as you leave this call, go on to Twitter or Instagram, Facebook, and follow us at @4ArtHistory. And then you'll be able to see those videos as they get launched on social media. But I will, as I say, send you a link to the first 20 as well. So thank you so much, everybody, and thank you so much to our speakers today. I'm sorry we didn't get to answer all of the questions, but I hope this has been helpful. I'm also going to send you in my email a link to our careers page on our website as well. So I hope this is all helpful, and see you again in September.